everyone, hope you're doing well and welcome to the West Ham Transfer Rumour Show. But it's the Transfer News Show as we're joined by Dharmesh. But before we get to him, Gonzo, how is oneself?
Oh, I'm very, very excited this morning. You've got to be careful when you start with a phrase like that. But there appears to be news in the offing, Geo.
Yeah, Dharmesh, first of all, how are you? And second of all, tell me about Danny. I need to know about Danny Ings.
Thanks for having me on. It's been too long. And I've had a few technical issues today, as you can probably tell. I'm doing this one on the phone, so if the sound is a bit dodgy, I do apologise. With regard to Danny Ings, this story started emerging yesterday that West Ham were interested, that made a bid. It's moved on really, really quickly now because as of this morning, we're hearing that the deal's been agreed with Aston Villa. We think the fee is around £12 million in an initial payment, plus £3 million in add-on. So the total package is worth around £15 million. He's due to have a medical, finalise those personal terms. And I think West Ham want to get this done so that he's available for the game against Everton on Saturday. So I think the registration deadline is Friday at midday. As long as he's registered by Friday at midday, then he can play in what looks like one of the biggest matches of West Ham season now.
Are you feeling confident it will get done, Dharmesh?
It's certainly trending that way. I think that Unai Emery hasn't really picked Danny Ings in his first 11, and I think he's happy to see if he can get another opportunity. And West Ham have provided him with that opportunity. It helps West Ham as well because they've been in the market for a striker, I think, for the whole window. Scamacca, he's new to the league. He's still settling in, and there's reports around the place that haven't been confirmed by West Ham that he could be carrying an injury as well. So could be great timing this for West Ham.
Well, you speak about we've been looking for a striker for some time, Dharmesh. Danny Ings has been quite late to the transfer window party in that sense. A couple of names to throw at you, really, which is Taron Moffey, who it was rumoured that we'd made a £25 million bid, and Mama Balde. Does this mean, if West Ham wrap up this Danny Ings deal, that we then won't go and sign either of these players?
From the outset, it might look that way. The Taron Moffey one, that's definitely that bid went in. It was £20 million plus £5 million in add-ons. Now, there's lots of talk about this bid being rejected. It hasn't been anything official with regard to that. And I spoke to someone close to the deal late last night who claims that Lorient would actually accept that bid, but the decision is going to come down to the player. Now this Danny Ings transfer is imminent, where West Ham will be spending, 12 to 15 million pounds. You'd question whether there would be that opportunity in the money for them to go in with another a deal as big as the Moffey one. The other information I'm getting as well is if Ings and Moffey were to sign, then there's a chance, I'm not saying it will definitely happen, there's a chance that West Ham may consider allowing Michail Antonio to move on. But that would be, as of this morning, the information I was getting, that would be if West Ham brought in two strikers, because I don't think it would be in their interest if they just brought in Danny Ings to allow Michail Antonio to go. Because if Scamacca is injured, and Danny Ings has had his injuries in the past as well, they don't want to leave themselves short, particularly with so little time left in the window. But I think all of these options are just still being considered at this stage. The one that looks the most concrete just now is Danny Ings. And then,
sorry, John.
Go on.
I was going to ask, do you think there's genuine interest in Antonio from other clubs?
I'm told there is. Yes, I'm told that there is interest in him. He's been so good for West Ham over the years. You guys will be able to tell me a lot more about his performances, seeing him week in and week out. Just gives you that different option. And I know some West Ham fans will say, well, yes, he does do that. He does occupy defenders, but we need someone who's going to score more goals, which is why probably they're hoping that Danny Ings will be that guy. But it's all going to depend, I think, on what West Ham can do in the next couple of weeks. I'm not saying it's impossible that if Ings comes, Antonio will be allowed to go. But as of today, the information that I'm getting from one source is that if they bring in 2, that's when they'd consider Antonio potentially going.
Interesting. Well, Danny Ings is grabbing all the headlines today, Dharmesh, but over the last few days, it's all been about David Moyes. What have you heard in regards to Moyes' future at West Ham?
Oh, it's a hot topic now, isn't it? Especially after that defeat to Wolves last weekend. And the information we're getting, I'm sure you've read about it as well. It's consistent with all of the reports you've read. And that is that it looks like that this could be a huge game now against Everton. And if West Ham were to lose that game, the information we're getting at Sky Sports News is that West Ham would consider replacing David Moyes as manager. So it's not cast iron that if West Ham lose, David Moyes is out. It would be under consideration. But they want to give him that opportunity. And it seems to me as well, with the whole Danny Ings transfer as well, they still seem to be backing him, because the impression I'm getting is the board don't actually want to sack David Moyes. They want to back him. They backed him in the summer, and they want him to be the guy that's successful at West Ham United. And he has been. For those 2 seasons, when in his second spell, his second spell, West Ham fans, a lot of them have been in dreamland. They couldn't have imagined that, that they'd be getting a run to the Europa League semi-finals, that they'd be challenging, let alone for Europe, for the Champions League as well. Of course, they didn't get to those Champions League places, but they've had European football for 2 seasons in a row. And I think that has given David Moyes a lot of credit. So I'm not saying if West Ham lose, he's out. But listen, results are currency. We know that. And so his position would come under scrutiny and would be considered if West Ham don't win this game.
Well, I mean, I appreciate you saying that. I certainly have the belief that if he loses this game, he'll probably be out. With that in mind, potential replacements for David Moyes. What have you heard along those sort of lines, please, Dharmesh?
Those ones, you see, that kind of information is very, very difficult, because you'll hear representatives of certain managers who will want some news out there. And then you've got to take certain things with a pinch of salt, because officially West Ham United will not be commenting on any kind of replacement, simply because David Moyes is in situ. He is their manager. They haven't sacked him. He is in charge of West Ham. So while that happens, the information is going to be restricted to interested parties of managers who want to get their manager's name out there. Like you, I've read various things about Rafael Benitez. But with regard to the West Ham United board, if they are considering David Moyes' position, then you would expect a business to be doing due diligence on potential replacements. Now, whether they've approached other managers, I simply wouldn't know. That would be West Ham United's business. But officially, they wouldn't be, simply because they want to give David Moyes that opportunity. Now, if David Moyes wins this game, I think it will be very difficult then for them to think, well, we want to change manager, because it appears, all the reports that we're hearing, it appears that he's been given this opportunity against Everton to try to start the turnaround, and been given the opportunity of bringing in someone like Danny Ings to try and start that turnaround. So, yes, clubs will always do due diligence on potential replacements. The names I've heard are the names that you've heard. Look, there was, ambitious talk earlier on about the likes of Thomas Tuchel and Mauricio Pochettino. My information as it stands at the moment is probably unrealistic. The Rafa Benitez one doesn't go away simply because there was that link before, wasn't there? Yeah. And it's almost like, I think David Sullivan did Rafa a favour almost, because he was all set to join West Ham, and then Real Madrid come calling, and David Sullivan says, look, it's Real Madrid.
Who would choose Real Madrid over West Ham?
I know, it's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. Ridiculous. Decision, yeah.
Anyway, that's all our clickbait titles done, Dharmesh. No. So we'll get on to the lesser news now. Craig Dawson.
Yeah. Oh, wow. He'll be pleased to say that this is lesser news. You're going to edit that bit. You'll edit that bit.
We will now.
Wolves are still waiting for West Ham to make a final decision on whether they will allow Craig Dawson to leave West Ham and go to Wolves. Now, look, this is a long-running one. This was on the verge of happening, as you know, on deadline day. West Ham were happy to facilitate that move for Craig Dawson to go from West Ham to Wolves, provided they brought in a replacement. Now, they thought they'd got that replacement. Jan Bednarek from Southampton looked like it was a goer. And then Aston Villa nipped in and they signed Jan Bednarek. And West Ham United told Craig Dawson, look, you know what the situation was. We could only let you go if you brought in a replacement. Bednarek's not coming anymore. You're staying at West Ham. And the reason he had to stay as well was because that unfortunate injury pre-season to Naif Aged. And they just couldn't afford to have to be in a position where they had so few centre-backs. The situation now is slightly different. About a week ago, I was told, when this bid had gone in, I was told that West Ham, in an ideal scenario, would want to bring in a replacement for Craig Dawson. That doesn't seem to be the case now. I think David Moyes has kind of intimated that as well, which would kind of imply that this could still yet be a goer for Craig Dawson. We know he's commuting to and from the Midlands. His family is there. He's got a house in the Midlands. So he's keen on making that move. He was keen on making that move in the summer. But with regard to a replacement this time, if you look at it, West Ham have got 4 central defenders who are all fit now. Ogbonna, Kera, Zuma, and Naif Aged. So it would be easier for West Ham to facilitate that move because they've got the players now in situ. They haven't got that injury to Naif Aged that they had before the start of the season. So they'd still be going into the rest of the season with 4 central defenders if Craig Dawson was to go. It does look like it's trending towards the move happening, but I think West Ham United will still want a fee for this because he's still got 6 months left on his contract. And if they are to allow Craig Dawson his wish and get that move, and look, let's be honest about it, it's a rival. It's a relegation rival that they'd be selling to. They'd want the money for Craig Dawson, so they'd want the deal to be right, I think.
Yeah, probably sort of 12 million plus 3 million in add-ons to cover that Danny Ings fee, I think. Geo, do you want to, should we skip that next round?
Yeah,
and then jump to your questions? Okay.
I'm just glad because it sounds like we're not getting Michael Keane, so that's a relief. Dharmesh, what I was going to ask is, who's in charge of the transfer window here? Because obviously we've come into this window. I mean, the summer feels a little bit hickledy-pickledy. You can guess if Moyes wanted that player, or Newman was involved. And this, where we're speaking now, like you said, there's uncertainty regarding David Moyes. He may be here next week. He may not be here, but yet we're still spending 12 million on Danny Ings. So who's sanctioning these moves, especially for the likes of Terem Moffi as well? That's even more of a obscure choice, if you like. So as a fan, we're sat here scratching our heads a little bit thinking, well, who's taking control of the transfer window?
Well, the information I have with regard to West Ham United, that it does work in an alignment. They're all on the same page as far as information I've been given. I know people will question, no, you're just saying that because that's what West Ham will say, but that's the information that I get. And the fact is that you've got the sporting director and Rob Newman working closely with David Moyes, but it all has to be signed off, of course, by the board and David Sullivan. So they will have their targets, but they all have to agree on those targets. And this will happen at every single club because you will have a situation where a manager wants a player, a sporting director might want a player, and the board might want a player, but they'll all have to talk and then agree, because I can't see a situation where they'll be signing players over David Moyes' head and saying to David Moyes, no, we're signing him, you're going to play him. Because I don't think David Moyes is that manager who's going to stand for something like that. He will have a talk with the people that are involved in all of this recruitment, with Rob Newman, with David Sullivan, and they will then have to agree on something. Because I think if one party is so steadfast and say this is not happening, they have got a big say in that. Because if it's David Sullivan who says, no, we're not going to do that, he holds the purse strings. He's the one who's going to have to sign off that check. Whereas if David Moyes says, I don't want this player, look, I want to play in this certain way, he's not going to fit, I don't want him, then they're going to have to listen to David Moyes as well and then make a decision as a recruitment group. But as far as I'm aware, they're all working together. And when a signing is made, there will have to be some sort of agreement in between all of those parties before that signing is made. I'm sure there's not a situation where David Moyes is on the training ground and then a car pulls up and they here you go. We've just
I don't know about that. It wouldn't be unfamiliar at West Ham. No. That's all I'm going to say. I just struggle to see the logic in giving a manager who has an uncertain future, let's call it that, allowing him to spend 12 million on Danny Ings when he might not be here next week, and the new manager comes in looking at Danny Ings going, I don't want him. We've just gone and spent. It's not like you're not buying him from Argos. You can't take him back within 28 days with your receipt as long as he's able to play football. So it just seems a bit of a strange one. The one that I was going to ask you about, Dharmesh, it's a rumour from ages ago, but Sky Sports Germany were the ones leading with it, and that was in regards to Vladimir Coufal and Bayer Leverkusen, because obviously Coufal's got 5-6 months left on his contract, and he was hotly tipped to be heading to Leverkusen. And there was a story that Sky Sports Germany ran for quite a while as well. Actually, it felt like it was going on for about a month. Is there any updates on that, or is it just gone completely dead?
Right. One thing I would say as well, I know he's entering the final few months of his contract. West Ham do have that option to extend for a further year, so you could effectively say it's 18 months because clubs are always very, very clever when they do these contracts. They always give themselves that leeway for situations such as this. You see it so many other times as well, like, you know, Marcus Rashford at Manchester United and Luke Shaw, their one-year options have just been triggered by United just to give themselves that breathing space for contract talks. And if those contract talks don't work out, then you've got that opportunity to sell a player and get good market value for him because he's still under contract. With regard to Coufal, it was a case of, yes, Leverkusen were interested. And I think at one stage, West Ham would have considered it, but only if they could have brought in a replacement for Coufal. Later on, as the days and the weeks went by, Coufal was emerging as a regular at West Ham, and he's starting most of their games now, if I'm not mistaken. And I think West Ham are quite reticent, aside of the Craig Dawson situation, to have any other departures in that back line, especially not Coufal for someone who's now playing. You could argue like Craig Dawson, he's kind of been withdrawn from the squad and the team of late, and because of this ongoing transfer with Wolves. Whereas with Leverkusen, I don't think it got as far as that for Coufal. I think it was an interest. They kind of maybe had tentative approaches to agents and maybe to West Ham as well to find out his availability. But as it stands at the moment, unless something changes miraculously in the next 10 to 12 days, Coufal will be staying, even though there has been that interest in from Leverkusen.
Just finally, Dharmesh, any other transfer rumours that you might have heard about? Any positions, any players linked to West Ham?
How many more do you want?
Well, that's all you know.
Yeah, you haven't got a central midfielder tucked away in there, have you?
No.
With a return policy to take back to Argos.
All I will say is that I'm glad and surprised that we've managed to get through this podcast without mentioning one of your central midfielders.
Yeah, but we don't want ban news.
We don't want to talk about it.
No, we can't. What have you heard about Declan Rice?
No. I was just like, whenever anyone speaks about West Ham, the name Declan Rice isn't too far away. I mean,
we're all resigned to it anyway, Dharmesh.
This is the information I'm getting from whenever I speak to West Ham fans. They say, look, he's definitely not going to go in January. And he's not going to go in January. There's no way West Ham would facilitate a move like that. But come the summer, it's a different kettle of fish. I think by then he will have 2 years left on his contract come the summer. So if he doesn't sign a new contract, which doesn't seem likely at the moment, it's the optimum time to sell him, because that's the time that West Ham will get the most amount of money for him. And I think that, look, we know that there's been all this talk about Arsenal being interested. There will be so many clubs that are interested in Declan Rice, which can only be good for West Ham in a bad situation because you don't want to see him go. But with regard to getting the money in for someone like Declan Rice, I'm sure that he'll be pitched in the 80, 90, 100 million pound mark it could even go higher than that, depending on how many clubs want to sign Declan Rice, because there are a handful of elite midfielders that we're going to be talking about in the summer. You're talking about Jude Bellingham, Enzo Fernandez, Moyes Caicedo, Declan Rice is in that bracket. But there are so many teams who want to buy these players. So there's going to be a situation where there's going to be a lot of teams looking at each of these players, which can only drive up the price. So it's not going to be, it's not going to just be West Ham giving him away. It's going to be something that they'll get top dollar for Declan Rice. But as you say, I mean, you guys are saying you're resigned to it. I'm not saying that he's definitely going to leave, but it just seems to be heading that way. One thing that West Ham will be desperate to do, not only for themselves, for their fans, but for transfer policy as well, they've got to stay in the Premier League as well, because how much that would impact on what they can spend in the summer and how much they can get for certain players. I just wonder what the market value would be for someone like Declan Rice if he's in the Premier League next season with West Ham, or the C word, the Championship.
Anyway, we'll leave it there. Dharmesh, thank you very much for joining us as always. Much appreciated.
No problem. Enjoyed it.
Gonzo, hopefully you enjoyed it as well.
Always enjoy it when Dharmesh comes on. Gives us authenticity, basically, doesn't it? I'm still perturbed at your purchasing techniques. I've just got visions of you buying a hoovering up the house, going back to Argos, saying, "Can I return this, please?" You've revealed a little bit too much there, Gio, I've got to say.
Anyway, if you guys at home have enjoyed it, please do drop a like on it by clicking thumbs up. Takes a second, really helps the channel out, and subscribe if you haven't. And until next time, we'll see you soon.